Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode from Ampro Engineering. This is going to be another installment of the Buyer's Guide series talking about the recently re-released Grasshopper 2. Previously I made a video on the Grasshopper, and like the Grasshopper, there is quite a lot of appeal to this car, not only for the person who's got that sentimental value of the Grasshopper 2, but also the new to the RC world person. First off, a little bit of a history on the Grasshopper 2. Obviously, this car was designed as a replacement to the Grasshopper. The standard Grasshopper 2 does have friction shocks front and rear. It has a ABS body. I'm going to pull this off here. Unlike the Grasshopper, this body is removed with 3 body pins. The original Grasshopper having originally needed screws. Please ignore the LA Gear sticker on the bottom of this car. When I bought it, it already had that, and I found it to be the most period correct thing, quite possibly in the world, so I left it there. Very basic design of the chassis. In fact, it is nothing more than an upgraded version of the original Grasshopper. The transmission, in fact, is exactly the same as the original style as the Grasshopper. However, this particular version is the later variant from the Midnight Pumpkin, so it has a reinforced axle shaft here, axle tube I should say, with larger profile ribs here to increase durability. It's a very good rear end. These are the standard wheels and tires. However, it is possible to find a vintage model called the Super G, which had wheels and tires very similar to the Super Hornet. The Super G would have had these rims and tires for the rear and these for the front. If you own a Super Hornet, these are the exact same mold, just a different color. And in fact, if you own a Wild one, it is again the exact same wheel and tire. The main difference is that this particular neon yellow was unique to the Super G Grasshopper. They also made a variant which was green. The green ones are a little harder to find, but to be honest, these are also very, very hard to find. The Super G also would have come with a yellow shock. Okay, front and rear. These in particular have been replaced with Super Hornet units, which I thought was a little more cohesive. I thought all the different colors really didn't work too well together. Most Grasshopper 2s are going to have these wheels and tires. These are the same tires that you would have found on the Striker, the Sonic Fighter, and the Falcon, and I'm sure there's a few others out there. In fact, these are the same rims that you would have found on the Striker, the Falcon, and the Sonic Fighter, just recolored. These happen to be white, much like the Striker. Personally, I happen to like these wheels quite a lot, but this size wheel is much more common to find rubber for it. These are a bit of a unique size and are a little bit tough to find. Now that the Grasshopper 2 has been re-released, you'd think it'd be easier to find tires for this car, let alone rims, but it turns out that the supply of these has diminished so far that anybody breaking a Grasshopper 2 kit is simply selling the wheels and tires. Unlike the original Grasshopper, this car does have an articulated rear axle, and much like the original Grasshopper, it also has the 380 motor. Super G models would have had the 540. This happens to be a Super G. I just didn't like the yellow shocks, or these, or the 540, so I kind of made it into the Grasshopper 2 that I wanted. One grievance about the Grasshopper 2, as well as the Super Hornet and the Hornet, is that normally the rear transmission mount here has this articulated little slider here. This is great. This allows for the rear suspension to articulate over bumps. However, upon acceleration, the transmission will slap into the chassis all the time and make just an irritating sound. So I made this little brace which will fit the Grasshopper 2 and the Super Hornet, which will prevent this slop in the rear axle and make the car a lot less noisy, but still have that proper articulation. Speaking of this area here, the Super Hornet and the Grasshopper 2 both have pins that hold their battery doors on. So unlike the Hornet or the Grasshopper, your battery will not be dragged behind the car, thanks to this little design, and this is from factory. The Grasshopper 2 also has a nice little place here for your on and off switch. Unfortunately, some of these speed controls you can see do not have switches that will fit in this original style. If you do want to keep in with this nice mount for the switch, the Tamiya ESCs all offer this little mounting setup here. Early cars did come with mechanical speed controls, as you can see here. These are simply decorative on my cars, as I do run ESCs, but you can see that there is a separate little bracket here which will hold the servo. The car is overall pretty darn robust. Some weak spots do include this area here on the chassis, and I have two of these chassis that somehow this front nose has been crushed off, and to be honest, I can't imagine how that happens. My only thought is someone ran the car without the bumper and plowed into a number of walls. Please, if you're going to buy one of these to run, you have to keep the front bumper on. It's pretty critical, otherwise you'll be replacing chassis. In terms of upgrades, the best thing you can add to a Grasshopper 2 is going to be oil-filled shocks for the front as well as the rear. It's really going to help the car to better handle rougher terrain. And when I say better handle, I mean be less terrible. It's still going to be bad because it's a Grasshopper 2 and that's just how it is, but it's going to be better. One grievance of mine with the Grasshopper 2 and the Super Hornet is the front suspension. They did alter the front end so that you can install these oil-filled front shocks. However, in doing so, the suspension has a very particular trait. Now, this one has been upgraded with the Ampro double wishbone setup. However, original setups have very, very high camber gain, which is fine. So does the Hornet and the Grasshopper. However, when you reverse this car, the suspension completely collapses down and the toe-in doesn't do it anymore because I've upgraded it, but originally the front wheels would point dramatically inward, and reversing the car would result in this kind of wiggle, and it's quite ridiculous. So that always annoyed me, but again, this is a Grasshopper 2. It's not an RC10 or a Losi XXX. It's a toy. Of course, for me, a recommended upgrade is going to have to be an ESC as well, as I simply cannot tolerate mechanical speed controls. These bodies tend to be robust. I mean, I think they're a little bit bland for me. That's why I added the rear spoiler and the front auxiliary lights. It was very odd to me that Tamiya produced a Grasshopper without eyeballs. I thought that was really odd, so I did add these just to give it a little bit more character. This body is painted by me. However, the paint scheme that you see here is quite similar to the original decals. The bulk of the difference being the two shades of green here would have been replaced by blue on the actual decal sheet. Also, the I'm Hopping Mad would have been yellow and not this light green. These decals up here, as well as these guys and the other decals that you see around the car, were produced by MCI Racing. However, please note that all the other decal, or stripes, these are actually painted onto the body. These are not stickers. The good thing about this body is that it's really hard to damage. Because the car has no wing, there's really nothing to break off at the rear. However, many of these bodies that you will see that are heavily abused will usually have these front posts broken off. However, that said, the bodies still seem to be quite usable. You will also note that they have a little grill area right here. Again, I didn't care for it, so I just got rid of it. But it would have a 4-slot, I believe a 4-slot grill right here. And there's also a decal that goes in this area here. It will, of course, have your standard Tamiya Hornet driver or Grasshopper driver. I think overall it's a clean body. It's a fairly easy one to paint because it's not particularly sharp or jagged and have strange shapes and such. The box art body is white, and this is a white molded body, so it's very easy just to slap some stickers on it that come if you do buy a re-release car and just get the car going. Again, I went for a little bit of a different look because I always found this car to be a little bit lacking in the personality, and I do apologize because I'm sure that there are some people that feel that this car is basically looking at the Mona Lisa. However, you know, for me, it never was that way, so I had to spruce it up a little bit. I think at this point here, it would be nice to take this car for a spin, and I am fairly nice to my car, so I'm just going to go buzz it around outside. These are great bashers. I don't quite treat my cars like that usually. In fact, this car is probably one of the cars that's, you know, obviously I spent a lot of time on this body, so I don't want to go a little too crazy on it, but I think it'd be nice to see how this car performs. Do a speed run there. Good. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that. This is a nice car to drive, you know, especially with the oil-filled shocks. If you are used to a Hornet or even a Grasshopper, this does almost feel like a Rolls-Royce. There's a lot more drivability with this car, a lot more control. I mean, remember, it's still a basic entry-level car, so don't expect, you know, performance buggy. You know, so please don't expect a high-performance buggy. Don't expect high-end buggy performance. So the question is, do you want one? Well, like the Grasshopper, I think there's two different kinds of people that want this car. You have the one person that is either obsessed with the early Tamiyas and just wants to add this to their collection, or you have the person that had one or wanted one as a kid. If you are either of those two people, go get one. The cars are cheap, they're plentiful. If you're into original cars, you can get one of these in very good shape for well under $200. If you're, you know, just into driving one around and you want to get a re-release kit, they're inexpensive and they're great cars. If, however, you feel this would be a great kit for a child, you know, unfortunately, to me, it's not so cut and dry. There's a lot better buggies out there for probably quite a bit cheaper. So I would hesitate to buy this for a youngster, unless you, in particular, the adult, are more obsessed with the older cars. So your child is going to be, you know, more exposed to some of these older cars. If you're just someone thinking, I want to buy one of these for my kid, I would strongly advise against it. There's a lot better Tamiya kits out there. Traxxas has a number of kits. However, I'm also the kind of person that feels these really should not be purchased assembled. I think that part of the enjoyment of these cars is the build, and Tamiya kits in particular are beautiful to build. Even their higher end cars are significantly more thought out in their assembly process and in their manuals than any other manufacturer out there. So although maybe you can find an inexpensive Chinese brand kit, and I just want to say that a lot of these Chinese brands are absolutely magnificent, but Tamiya part availability can be a lot easier. A lot of these cars have huge followings, so parts will be available well into the coming decades. And for beginners, the simplicity of this chassis is excellent, and for beginners, the simplicity of some of the entry-level Tamiya kits is absolutely spot on. So I definitely recommend something a little more capable than this for a youngster, but don't, you know, well, I hope you enjoyed that. You know, I do really like this car now. In fact, I would have to say, you know, I have to say that I do love this car now. I always wanted a Grasshopper too, but I never fell in love with the car until I built this one. So I'm very happy that I did, and it's always been a fun car to drive around. Stay tuned, I've got a lot more parts coming up. I've got some upgraded parts for the Falcon, basically done, and then I've got a ton more in the Buyer's Guide series. So please subscribe if you do like this content. It really helps me out. And feel free and comment away. I'm always happy to hear what you think about these vehicles. You know, they're a big enjoyment for me, and I love working on them. You can subscribe. Please add me on Facebook and Instagram at Ampro Engineering on both. And before you take off, please check out the band Blue Pinto. They allow me to use their songs in my video, and a link to their Facebook page is in the end credits. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.